Well, I think it has to be seen in the context of the political and cultural situation in Italy. We're facing the end, hopefully, the end of the Berlusconi era, while at the same time, the Berlusconi government has just cut severely into cultural budgets, up to 80%, which is amazing. I mean, amazing in a shocking way. And at the same time, you have this guy, Luigi Scabi, who is one of the worst colleagues in my profession, you know, so-called critic, who, yeah, he's a kind of lapdog of Berlusconi, curating the Italian pavilion. And this is something that will be very hard to ignore, I think. And to be quite honest, I'm not envying Bice Kuriger for having to work with that kind of structure or having to negotiate that kind of situation. At the same time, I think she has the integrity to do it. And I think what a lot of people have to keep in mind in general is that in Venice you have to sharply distinguish between the national pavilions and the curated part of the exhibition. And a lot of people, even though they know it, somehow don't make the distinction. They're disappointed by the pavilions and blame it on the curator. If you think of Liam Gillick's participation in the German pavilion, or even Gregor Schneider's house in the German pavilion, which made tangible the horror of Germany, you know, quite literally. I find that quite interesting and thrilling, and of course it can go terribly wrong. And either if someone just ignores the pavilion and just makes a nice exhibition, which could be in any gallery, and you just think, what are you doing here? And or someone who kind of just in a kind of forgetful way gives in to the grandeur of representing a nation. So I think it's just saying, if someone would say, yeah, national pavilion's outdated, it's like saying, well, history is outdated. I think it's a wrong concept of history and how to deal with it if you say, let's get rid of them. I mean, generally speaking, I think we shouldn't ask artists for too many responsibilities. I think one of the assets of being an artist is being irresponsible. And that said, I think depending on the work, it might be necessary to think of your audience. I've made the experience over the last years that a lot of the more exciting stuff takes place outside of the Giardini in the sort of, yeah, the newer pavilions, so to speak, the ones that are usually housed in temporary spaces for that pavilion, a palazzo or a church or somewhere in the city. And it's always at least one or two each time where you're taken aback by something, or where you're really thrilled by something you hadn't expected. Last time for me it was the Singapore pavilion by Ming Wong, discovering artists you've never heard of who've been doing work for 60 years. So I think the whole category of age is also, that's a category that is outdated, I think. I think I have to come to understand that this whole kind of obsession with youth in art is just as dubious as the obsession with the grand old master. That, I mean, it's a phenomenon in culture in general. You have the same in literature. You have the debutante, and then you have the ones who suffer long enough to get the prizes eventually. In Berlin. The future is bilingual. I hope not. Oh, that's almost like asking someone, how many viruses do you have in yourself? I mean, it sounds yuck, the idea of having nations in yourself. So the very question fills me with discontent. for art to be claiming this kind of like transcendental nation is a tricky concept, because it's not by definition, or it's not, you know, art has a very weird status between being on the margins and in the very center at the same time. You know, it's full of retired arms dealers and poor artists. And then to claim a nation for that is kind of ignoring the fact that it's too heterogeneous for that. I'm pretty determined usually to see as many of the non-Giardini pavilions as possible. I've always gone for the opening, I guess because I'm a critic, I'm supposed to go for the opening. Because I've also often written about Venice, so I had to be there during the opening week. What I've always found amazing is that they get away with giving the curator so little budget. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think they get 600,000 or 700,000 or something. Like the Berlin Biennial has 2.5 million, I think, you know. And I always am quite impressed by what the curators pull off nevertheless, knowing that often they have to rely on galleries paying for the work to be installed, or some other institution involved or something. So Venice is consciously gambling on the market in the sense of providing for its budget, basically, and that often compromises the quality of what's on show, unfortunately. I mean, Harald Seemann was, I guess, the last one who had the network and the connections to make it look as if it was a 3 million, 4 million budget show. Even with him, I remember there were these huge Jason Rhodes, Paul McCarthy, where you could see where the money comes from, you know. It was good work, but still it was very present, you know, the market in that regard. I think Venice is kind of a purgatory for curators, because it's more about cultural politics than anything else, in terms of the curators having to deal with the Italian bureaucracy and the Venice system. I actually think it would be fantastic if the art world would find a form of protest the way the film festival in '68 found a form of protest, which meant that most directors and most people present basically agreed, let's just put a strike on the festival and discuss what's happening instead. I mean, that would be amazing to see that happen. But I think it won't happen, because there's too many personal stakes. The artists who want to show their work, the dealers in the back trying to show it to the collectors, etc., etc. So that's a bit different to the scenario of a film festival, I guess. But still then, there's this whole, remember that anecdote about Polanski being pissed off and driving off in a sports car towards Monaco. You know, there's always these kinds of reactions. You have Godard and Polanski. But it should be the entire art world, if it exists, making a political stance saying, you've crossed the line here, you know, when you talk about politics and culture in Italy.